I've worked in enough offices to know that strange things happen behind closed doors, but the year I spent at Larkwell Solutions in Portland Ridge taught me a whole new meaning of office politics. I thought I'd seen it all: backstabbing, petty fights, overblown egos, but nothing prepared me for the chaos that unfolded when a hopelessly inexperienced man got promoted over everyone more qualified. Watching it was like observing a slow-motion car crash. You knew it was going to be disastrous, but you couldn't look away. Our department had around 30 people: data entry clerks, compliance officers, a handful of analysts like me. The hierarchy was simple: one manager, 3 team leads, and the rest of us. Or at least it was simple until Tyler Griggs got his promotion. Tyler had been at the company for less than a year. Fresh out of college, he had 0 leadership experience, and the most responsibility he'd ever had was keeping track of his own spreadsheets, which he still somehow called those table things. And somehow the company decided he was the perfect candidate for team lead. HR policy was crystal clear: at least a year at the company, leadership experience, spotless record, recommendations from peers or previous managers. Tyler had none of that. What he did have was a knack for hanging around upper management, laughing too loudly at their jokes, and volunteering for tasks that looked important without actually requiring any competence. Somehow, that was enough. The announcement email went out, and the office collectively held its breath. People who had been at the company for 5, 10, even 15 years looked pale. Dana, one of the most efficient, respected analysts in our department, had been openly encouraged to apply, but her application was quietly dismissed. HR told her the posting had been suspended. Then 2 days later, reopened, and immediately closed with Tyler's name on the memo. Grievances were filed and promptly dropped. Everyone knew this wasn't just unfair, it was a deliberate slap in the face to anyone who actually deserved the role. Before the promotion, Tyler was tolerable, if awkward. After it, he became widely hated, except by a few sycophants who seemed to thrive on proximity to power. He walked around like a king in his own mind, chest out, chin high, exuding confidence he didn't earn. And the more people hated him, the more oblivious he seemed. He genuinely believed that power equaled respect, and respect would come naturally if he just smiled enough. Middle management noticed the tension and pulled Tyler aside multiple times. I overheard bits of their conversations. You need your team to trust you. Find a way to connect. Tyler's solution? Monthly team bonding happy hours. Attendance wasn't technically required, but he happily added, you should think of it like it is required. That smile he flashed when he said it was all wrong, performative, forced, with too many teeth. You could feel your skin crawl just looking at him. And he didn't stop with people under his direct supervision. He cast a wide net, dragging in anyone even tangentially associated with our floor, including me, even though I reported to a different lead entirely. The reaction was immediate: panic, whispered complaints, frantic schedule juggling. Some employees had long commutes, others had young children. Many were balancing second jobs. Still, they tried to make it work, terrified that skipping would mark them as uncooperative. Me? I didn't go. Not because I disliked socializing. I had been to house parties with coworkers before and liked them well enough, but drinking after hours with a guy who clawed his way up by brown-nosing management? Absolutely not. And more importantly, I knew my rights. If work required you to be somewhere, they had to pay you. Tyler couldn't enforce this rule with a fake smile. He tried to pressure me at my cubicle 3 separate times that day. Leaning against the wall, grinning like a predator, he asked, "You're coming tonight, right? Everyone else is making it work." I tapped my badge against my monitor and said, "If it's required, put me on the clock. Otherwise, I won't be there." His grin froze. "It's not required," he stammered. "Then I won't be there," I said flatly. He left in a huff, shoulders stiff, steps sharp. That night I went home, cooked pasta, watched a movie, and slept well. The next morning, the office felt like a forced family reunion, everyone pretending it had gone fine, avoiding Tyler's attempts at casual conversation. At the 10 a.m. stand-up, Tyler strutted about like a peacock. "Great turnout last night," he said. Then glaring in my direction, he added, "Some people need to work on not isolating themselves. It's important to be team players." I didn't respond. Inside, though, something sharp and cold settled in my chest. If he wanted to play games, I could too. Unlike Tyler, I knew the rules. The first team bonding happy hour was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and by mid-afternoon, the office was already a mix of nervous energy and whispered complaints. People circled their desks like predators pacing their territory, quietly calculating how to make the event work, without it completely wrecking their evening plans. Parents were calling babysitters, commuters were checking traffic apps, and a few brave souls were muttering about excuses they could plausibly give. The tension was thick, like static in the air before a storm. Tyler, of course, was oblivious. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he thrived on the chaos he caused. He moved from desk to desk, grinning too wide, leaning in like a man who believed his presence alone commanded loyalty. He stopped at my cubicle, resting his forearm on the partition. "Hey, I thought we could really use everyone tonight," he said, eyes scanning mine like a kid checking to see if he'd been caught sneaking cookies. I tapped a few keys, keeping my expression neutral. "If it's required, put me on the clock, otherwise I won't be there." His grin faltered, then stiffened. "It's not required," he said finally, voice brittle. I didn't answer. He straightened, muttered something under his breath, and walked away, leaving a faint tension behind him like a cloud of bad cologne. By 6 p.m., the office was nearly empty. A few determined souls packed their things and headed toward the designated bar, a cramped, sticky place a 15-minute drive away. Inside, the scene was half-hearted, awkward, and painful to watch. People tried to look cheerful, but it was clear they were counting minutes until they could leave. Conversations were stilted, laughter forced. Some attendees checked their phones constantly as if looking for an escape route. Others fidgeted, glancing at the clock or their empty drinks, hoping no one noticed they were quietly planning their exit. I stayed behind, making dinner plans for myself, and scrolled through Slack. Messages from coworkers came in almost immediately. Kid couldn't find sitter. Do I have to? Traffic's insane. Reading them made me smirk. Nobody had to be there. Not legally, not ethically. Tyler's imagined authority had no power over reality. And yet, everyone who did attend acted as though their jobs depended on surviving the awkward evening. Over the next hour, people started quietly slipping out, one by one. Each departure seemed to chip away at Tyler's carefully constructed fantasy of connection and team morale. He tried to maintain a smile, but it became strained. His shoulders tensed, and he fidgeted with his phone or his drink as he looked around for anyone to validate his presence. By the time most of the team had left, Tyler was left at the bar with only a handful of sycophants, desperately trying to fill the silence with small talk. The contrast between his expectations and reality was almost comical if it hadn't been so painful to witness. That night, I cooked dinner, watched a movie, and slept well. The satisfaction of knowing I had exercised my rights, simply by refusing to bend to a ridiculous unpaid team event, was subtle, but deeply satisfying. I felt a quiet sense of justice, small, personal, but real. The next morning, Tyler returned to the office with his usual performance-ready confidence, strutting down the hallway like a peacock. He bragged to anyone who would listen about the turnout, ignoring the obvious. Most attendees had abandoned ship as soon as they could. At the 10 a.m. stand-up, he tried again to assert authority. Thanks to everyone who came out last night, he said. Participation is noticed. It's what separates team players from the rest. His gaze landed on me. I stared straight ahead, saying nothing. Inside, though, a cold, sharp satisfaction settled. If he wanted to play games, I could play too. Unlike Tyler, I knew the rules. By midweek, quiet conversations were spreading across the office. People were sharing knowledge of their rights, realizing they could decline future happy hours without consequence. Tyler's grip on the team's obedience began slipping, bit by bit. Every polite refusal, every excuse, every firm no chipped away at his imagined authority. Fear is easy to command. Respect is earned. Tyler had neither. The first happy hour ended in isolation, not triumph. Tyler sat at the bar, alone, scanning empty chairs, desperately trying to force a connection that wasn't there. The dedicated sycophants lingered, but their presence was hollow. The team had learned a lesson quietly, collectively, without him ever realizing it. And I knew the next happy hour would be even more interesting. After the first happy hour, the office dynamic shifted subtly but unmistakably. Tyler came in the next day still trying to project authority, but you could see the tension in his posture. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his smiles a little more strained. Even the sycophants, the few brave souls who had stuck by him at the bar, seemed hesitant, unsure how far their loyalty could stretch before reality hit them too. I could almost hear the internal panic buzzing under his carefully rehearsed facade. For the rest of the week, Tyler tried everything he could think of to repair his image. He complimented people excessively, walked around telling everyone how valued they were, and even attempted awkward small talk in the break room. Problem: nobody believed him. People were polite, sure, but the smiles were thin, the laughs forced, and the eye contact fleeting. Every attempt at connection seemed to bounce off the invisible wall the team had collectively erected. I kept my distance, of course. I didn't need to participate in his awkward attempts at friendship. I had my own little shield, the law. I knew perfectly well that I wasn't required to attend these events, and the confidence of standing firm gave me a sense of quiet power. From my desk, I watched Tyler flounder like a fish out of water. He had expected compliance, not resistance. He had expected fear to translate into respect. Instead, he got polite rebellion and subtle defiance, and he hated it. By midweek, whispers began circulating through the office. Quiet, hushed conversations at desks and in corners. Did you see him at the bar? I barely lasted an hour. Honestly, I won't be going next time. It was like a slow ripple of rebellion spreading through the team. Tyler wasn't aware that his mandatory but optional rule had completely backfired. The more he tried to force camaraderie, the more he highlighted his own inadequacy, and people were starting to talk about it openly but carefully. No one wanted to be the one singled out. Then came the small victories. Dana, who had been quietly fuming since Tyler's promotion, refused to attend the next minor social gathering at the office. No explanations, no excuses, just a calm, confident, "I won't be there." A few others followed suit. The effect was immediate. Tyler's attempt to maintain control started slipping further. He would hover by her desk, smile too brightly, say something about team spirit, and she would nod politely and return to her work. The power imbalance was gone, replaced with polite indifference. Meanwhile, Tyler's desperation became almost comical. He would organize pointless team-building exercises during work hours, quizzes, icebreakers, even a mini scavenger hunt around the office trying to make people like him. Participation was still technically optional, but he treated it as a test of loyalty. Most people went through the motions but barely engaged. A couple of sycophants applauded his every word, but the rest of the office had tuned him out. He was performing for an audience that had already checked out, and it was painfully obvious. It was during this time that I decided to quietly empower the team even further. One morning, I drafted a friendly, informative email. Nothing confrontational, nothing antagonistic, just the facts. I reminded everyone that state law clearly stated unpaid hourly employees could not be forced to attend after-work events. I framed it as helpful information, nothing more. The effect was immediate. People stopped panicking about the next happy hour. They whispered thank you and shared the email in small groups. Tyler, meanwhile, had no idea what was happening. His control was slipping further, and he didn't know why. By the end of the week, Tyler was visibly defeated. His confidence, which had always seemed so performative, cracked under the collective subtle rebellion of the team. He was still trying, still smiling, still flapping his wings against a cage he didn't realize he was in, but the room no longer responded. He had been elevated to a role he couldn't fulfill, surrounded by people who no longer feared him or respected him. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had played a part in that, without ever raising my voice or breaking the rules, was almost intoxicating. The subtle shift in office culture was profound. Meetings ran smoother, people were quieter, more focused. The after-work events once dreaded became optional in spirit as well as law. And Tyler? He remained a lonely figure in the background, desperately trying to regain control over a team that no longer gave it to him willingly. It was the first taste of real power in the office, not the fake authority Tyler wielded, but the quiet strength of understanding your rights, standing your ground, and letting the rules do the talking. After Tyler's first failed happy hour and the quiet rebellion that followed, you would think he'd give up. But no, he doubled down. By the second week, his desperation was palpable. The moment he walked into the office, he carried himself differently, like a man who'd spent a night replaying his failures and decided the only way to fix them was to ramp up the intensity. Every smile was sharper, every compliment forced, every attempt at small talk exaggerated. It was exhausting to watch. That Monday morning, he called a voluntary team meeting voluntary in name only. "This is a great chance for everyone to get together and discuss our successes and challenges," he said, voice a little too loud, tone a little too cheerful. Everyone in the room knew the truth. If you skipped, he would notice. And he would make sure management noticed. But by now, people had tasted their own power. Subtle defiance had become almost thrilling. As he droned on about team synergy and active participation, I could see the tension among my coworkers. Some tried to sit upright, nodding dutifully. Others leaned back, arms crossed, eyes glazed over. The meeting was a display of polite compliance versus silent rebellion. I kept quiet, observing, letting the absurdity of it all settle in. Tyler had created an environment where his authority existed only in his head, and it was crumbling from every side. After the meeting, he hovered near the break room, handing out notes with motivational quotes and tips about communication. I watched him struggle to engage people. Dana walked past, glanced at him, and smiled politely without stopping. He tried to initiate conversation, only to be met with monosyllabic replies and polite nods. Every interaction seemed to highlight his inadequacy. It was painful, but also mesmerizing the way his imagined world clashed with reality. By midweek, the office gossip network had fully activated. People quietly discussed strategies for managing him without giving in, sharing tips on how to politely decline after-work events, and warning each other about the upcoming bonding sessions. My email from the previous week, the one outlining legal rights regarding unpaid after-hours events, had spread further than I'd anticipated. Suddenly, Tyler's attempts at coercion were met with knowledge and quiet resistance, and he had no idea why. Then came the first real escalation. Tyler, frustrated with the lack of participation, decided to publicly recognize employees he deemed team players. At the morning stand-up, he singled out a few sycophants with exaggerated praise. "See how much they care. They show up for the team." He glanced toward me, and I could feel the tension rise. "Some people," he said, smirking slightly, "could learn a thing or two about being part of a team." He didn't say my name, but everyone knew who he meant. I didn't respond. I let it hang in the air. Then, about 20 minutes later, I drafted a short, friendly message to the team. Something simple, factual, and non-confrontational. "Hey everyone, just a reminder that state law says unpaid hourly employees cannot be required to attend after-work events. Feel free to plan your evenings accordingly." I hit send and leaned back, watching the subtle shift begin. The effect was immediate. People started sharing the message quietly, relieved murmurs rippled through the office, and the upcoming happy hour became less of a source of dread. Tyler, on the other hand, had no idea what had just happened. He continued with his forced enthusiasm, unaware that his authority was slipping further. The team, now armed with knowledge and unity, no longer responded to his threats or compliments. They simply did their work and politely disengaged. By Friday, Tyler was visibly drained. His posture sagged, his smile was less confident, and he started speaking faster, as if words alone could regain the ground he had lost. But nothing worked. The office had collectively realized that his power was performative, temporary, and entirely dependent on fear and ignorance. And we weren't afraid anymore. That week taught me something important. Standing your ground doesn't require confrontation or rebellion. Sometimes knowledge alone applied calmly and confidently is enough to shift the balance. And watching Tyler flounder, day after day, was proof that authority without competence is fragile. Very fragile. By the time the weekend rolled around, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Tyler would continue trying, of course, but the team had quietly reclaimed their evenings, their sanity, and most importantly, their dignity. And I had a front row seat to the unraveling, savoring every awkward moment. By the time the third week rolled around, Tyler's desperation had become almost tangible. He seemed to move through the office like a man trying to balance on a tightrope, constantly teetering, trying not to fall. The previous happy hours had failed spectacularly, but he was determined to regain his control. His next brilliant idea was simple, predictable, and utterly transparent. He would schedule a series of mandatory but optional after-work events, each one slightly different, each one framed as crucial for team cohesion. The invitations hit our inboxes early Monday morning. Tyler had spent hours perfecting the wording, trying to make it sound casual yet persuasive. We'd love everyone to join for drinks and snacks this Friday. It's not required, but your participation is highly appreciated and noticed by management. The highly appreciated part was code, the kind of corporate sugar meant to disguise pressure. Everyone's stomach sank. I watched as coworkers opened the emails and their shoulders stiffened, expressions ranging from annoyance to mild panic. I ignored the email. My evening was already planned dinner, a little reading, some quiet time away from office politics. And I knew my rights. Hourly employees cannot be required to attend unpaid social events. Tyler couldn't enforce compliance, no matter how much he tried to act like a benevolent overlord. But of course, he noticed. Midweek, he stopped by my cubicle, leaning too heavily on the partition. "Hey, I just want to check you're coming this Friday, right? Management notices who participates." I looked up calmly, tapping my keyboard. "If it's required, put me on the clock. Otherwise, I won't be there." His face twitched. "It's not required," he muttered, clearly frustrated that I wasn't reacting with guilt or panic. I smiled faintly, returning to my work. As the week dragged on, I noticed subtle changes in the office dynamic. Coworkers who had reluctantly attended the first happy hour were now quietly discussing strategies for avoiding the upcoming ones. There were whispers at desks, brief huddles by the coffee machine, and quiet conversations in the hallways. Knowledge about our rights was spreading like wildfire. By the time Friday arrived, the atmosphere had shifted. Fear had been replaced with quiet confidence, polite defiance, and subtle humor. Friday evening came, and Tyler arrived at the bar early, wearing his usual too-wide grin, clutching a few drinks for his loyal followers. The rest of the team trickled in, slowly. Not because they were eager to socialize, but because some felt obligated, half out of fear, half out of politeness. Within an hour, most attendees started slipping out. One by one, excuses were offered. Family commitment, traffic, prior engagement. Tyler tried to intercept them, making small talk, praising team spirit. But the polite nods and half smiles didn't hide the truth. He had no leverage here. I sat at home sipping tea and watched as reports of the event trickled through Slack. People were laughing about their clever ways to leave early, sharing stories of Tyler's increasingly awkward attempts at conversation. It was almost comical. Tyler had constructed an elaborate cage of authority, and we were quietly slipping out one by one, without confrontation, without rebellion, just exercising our rights and using subtle defiance as our shield. Afterward, Monday morning brought a familiar scene. Tyler attempting to reassert control, striding through the office like a man holding onto air. He complimented people excessively, made small talk with those who stayed late, and tried to frame the event as a success. But everyone had learned the pattern. No one bought it. The silence and polite indifference around him spoke volumes. By now, it was clear. Tyler's imagined power depended entirely on fear and ignorance, neither of which existed anymore. The team had quietly reclaimed its autonomy, and Tyler was left to flounder. And I knew one thing with certainty. The next attempt at a mandatory but optional event would be just as doomed. This week had taught me something important. Authority isn't given by a title or a badge. It's earned, carefully and consistently. And when it's based on manipulation or sycophancy, it is fragile. Watching Tyler's slow, clumsy unraveling was satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. It was like watching someone try to build a sandcastle while the tide quietly rolled in, wave by wave. By the time the fourth team bonding event rolled around, the office atmosphere had completely shifted. Tyler's frantic attempts to maintain control were no longer met with fear or compliance. Instead, they were met with quiet observation, subtle amusement, and polite indifference. The team had learned something crucial. They didn't need to play his game. The leverage had shifted, and Tyler hadn't even noticed. It started that Monday. Tyler came in with his usual exaggerated cheer, striding down the hallway as though his presence alone demanded attention. He passed my desk and grinned, leaning casually on the partition. "Hey, just checking, looking forward to Friday?" I simply raised an eyebrow and returned to my work. The silence, the refusal to engage, seemed to make him twitch inwardly, though he hid it behind his practiced smile. As the week progressed, I noticed subtle signs of the shift. People were talking quietly in corners, sharing strategies for politely declining the event, reminding each other of the laws regarding unpaid after-hours obligations, and even giving tips for navigating Tyler's awkward attempts at persuasion. It was a quiet solidarity, almost invisible to him, but undeniable to those participating. The team was reclaiming autonomy in the most understated way possible. By Thursday, Tyler was pacing slightly more, constantly glancing toward desks, trying to catch someone off guard. His attempts at casual conversation became more forced, more desperate. He complimented employees excessively, gestured too broadly, and tried to inject humor into awkward silences. People smiled politely, nodded, but the warmth wasn't there. The disconnect was palpable, a silent wall that he couldn't breach. Friday came, and the office was eerily calm. Tyler arrived early at the bar, armed with a stack of voluntary participation notes and a few loyal sycophants in tow. The first group trickled in, making their way to him with smiles that were polite but empty. Within an hour, the event began to unravel. Excuses were offered. Family dinner, commute, prior engagement. Slowly, attendees began leaving, and Tyler's forced grin faltered. He tried to engage them, trying to salvage the illusion of authority, but no one responded in the way he expected. Meanwhile, I stayed home, quietly observing the fallout through messages on Slack and text updates from coworkers. People shared clever strategies like arriving late or leaving early and joked quietly about Tyler's increasingly awkward behavior. It was almost surreal, his empire of fear collapsing without a single overt confrontation. All he had to wield was imagined authority, and it evaporated the moment the team exercised their rights. Monday morning brought the usual scene. Tyler, unshaken in appearance but increasingly flustered behind the facade, attempted to reassert himself during stand-up. "Thanks to those who participated last night," he said, glancing around the room. "Team spirit is what keeps us moving forward." He looked at me, hoping for a reaction, but I kept my gaze on my notebook. The silence was deafening. Around the room, polite indifference dominated. People had learned to carry their own quiet power, and Tyler's words bounced harmlessly off the collective wall. It was fascinating to observe. Meetings ran smoother, people focused more on their work, and casual chatter about after-hours events diminished. Tyler's role as a social enforcer had effectively evaporated. He remained in the office, still performing for an audience that had tuned him out. His attempts to manipulate the team were transparent, ineffective, and increasingly awkward. The lesson was clear. Authority granted by title means nothing if it's not paired with competence and respect. Fear can only go so far, and once it's gone, the illusion crumbles. The office had quietly shifted its balance of power. We weren't just surviving Tyler's antics. We were thriving in spite of them, reclaiming autonomy and subtly teaching a lesson without a single confrontation. And as I watched from my desk, I realized something important. Real power doesn't come from position, fear, or forced compliance. It comes from understanding your rights, acting with quiet confidence, and letting the rules speak for you. Tyler may have had the title, but the team, calm, united, and informed, held the real power. By the time the fifth and final team bonding event came around, Tyler was visibly exhausted, though he tried desperately to hide it behind his usual wide grin and over-the-top enthusiasm. The office had changed. What once had been an environment of fear and uncertainty had transformed into a quiet, informed collective. The team had learned the rules, exercised their rights, and reclaimed autonomy without raising their voices or breaking protocol. Tyler had no idea that his authority was now mostly an illusion. The invitations went out early Friday morning. "We'd love everyone to join for drinks and snacks tonight," Tyler wrote. "It's not required, but your participation will be noticed." Almost immediately, the reactions were telling. Slack channels buzzed not with panic, but with amusement and clever strategies. People whispered about who would go, who would stay, and how to navigate Tyler's awkward attempts at enforcement. Knowledge had given the team power, and they wielded it subtly but effectively. I ignored the invitation, just as I had done every time. My plans were simple: dinner, a book, a little quiet time to decompress. I didn't need to prove anything. The team's subtle rebellion had already spoken louder than any words could. By 6 p.m., the scene at the bar was almost surreal. Tyler arrived early, armed with snacks, drinks, and a few loyal sycophants. The first group trickled in, moving cautiously, offering polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Within an hour, most had slipped out with excuses: family obligations, long drives home, prior commitments. Tyler tried desperately to engage them, leaning in, complimenting them, making awkward jokes, but nothing worked. The energy was flat, polite, and completely disengaged. Back at home, I watched the updates come in. Coworkers shared notes, jokes, and quiet victories. The morale of the office had quietly shifted. Tyler's attempts to manipulate and control had failed spectacularly, and he had no idea why. Every polite nod, every early departure, every subtle refusal chipped away at the fragile illusion of his authority. Monday morning brought a predictable scene. Tyler walked into the office, trying to project confidence, but it was thinner than ever. During stand-up, he praised the few who attended the event and reminded everyone about team spirit. His eyes scanned the room for reactions, landing briefly on me. I stared down at my notebook, expression neutral. Around the room, polite indifference dominated. People were back to focusing on their work, quietly empowered, no longer anxious about after-hours obligations. Tyler's attempts to enforce authority were transparent and ineffective. The office had reached a new equilibrium. Meetings ran smoother, work flowed more efficiently, and the dread that once accompanied Friday evenings was gone. The team had learned something invaluable. Authority without competence and respect is empty, and fear alone is never enough to sustain it. Knowledge, confidence, and unity, however, are a far more potent combination. And then came the moment that truly felt like closure. Tyler tried one last time to stage a voluntary team lunch during work hours, framing it as essential for morale. This time, the room collectively ignored the theatrics. Conversations continued, keyboards clattered, and work proceeded uninterrupted. The subtle, quiet rebellion had become second nature. Tyler was left to perform for an audience that had stopped watching. I realized something in that moment. Real power isn't about forcing people to comply. It isn't about fear, flattery, or appearances. It comes from knowing your rights, standing firm, and trusting yourself enough to act accordingly. Watching Tyler flounder day after day without ever breaking the rules was a lesson in quiet authority, patience, and subtle strategy. By the end of that week, Tyler's attempts at team bonding had become almost a joke among the staff. He remained in the office, still trying, still performing, still clutching the illusion of control. But the team, calm, informed, and united, had quietly reclaimed its power. And I had stood tall, simply by knowing my rights and refusing to bow to fear or pretension. Sometimes, the smallest acts of defiance, grounded in knowledge and confidence, are the ones that carry the most weight. Tyler learned this too late, and the rest of us learned it just in time. And in that quiet, unspoken victory, the office finally felt like it belonged to the people who actually worked there, not the one who pretended to be in charge.